The canyon wind bit through Caleb's worn duster, whipping dust devils across the cracked earth. 3 days without a fresh track, 2 since his water skin ran low, and the sun was a forge hammer striking the anvil of the sky. He checked the breech of his rifle, the cold steel a familiar comfort against his gloved hand. The bounty on Elias Thorne was clear. Dead or alive, but preferably the former, given the whispers of what Thorne's gang had done to the last marshal who'd crossed them. Caleb had taken the job because no one else would, and the coin meant a new start, far from the ghosts of his own past. He spurred his horse, Dust, a sturdy, dun-colored gelding, onward. The animal's hooves scuffed over shale, each step a deliberate, measured beat against the vast silence. Overhead, a single buzzard circled, a patient, dark omen against the blinding blue. Caleb squinted, adjusting his faded bandana. Ahead, a faint smear of dark stone against the lighter ochre suggested shelter, perhaps a dry wash, or, if he was lucky, a forgotten spring. He was heading into the Dead Man's Pass, a stretch of territory notorious for vanishing men and erasing trails. Thorne was either a fool or a genius to choose this route, but Caleb knew one thing: Thorne was no fool. He found the ghost town just as the last rays of sun bled across the horizon, painting the skeletal structures in hues of blood orange and deep violet. Veridia, the faded sign above the leaning saloon entrance read, bullet holes peppering the letters like a forgotten constellation. The town was a graveyard of ambition, a few dozen timber and clapboard buildings, most half-collapsed, their windows like vacant eyes staring out at the encroaching desert. Dust had settled on everything, a thick, pervasive blanket muffling any sound. Caleb dismounted, the creak of his saddle leather unnaturally loud in the profound silence. He led Dust toward a stable, its roof mostly intact. The air inside was cool, stale, and carried the faint, lingering scent of old hay and horses long departed. He found a relatively clean stall, removed Dust's saddle, and gave the horse a meager handful of oats from a small pouch, rationing carefully. His own meal was hardtack, and a sip of precious warm water. He scanned the perimeter, rifle in hand. No fresh tracks, no smoke. No sound but the wind sighing through the broken panes. Yet a prickle of unease traced its way up his spine. Ghost towns were never truly empty. They held the echoes of those who'd lived and died there. He chose the saloon for his night's shelter. It offered better cover and a clear view of the single dusty street. He barricaded the swinging doors with a fallen beam and settled near a shattered window, rifle across his lap, eyes sweeping the moon-drenched desolation. The first sign that Veridia wasn't as dead as it seemed came with the smell of wood smoke, faint but distinct, just before dawn. Caleb stiffened, every sense on high alert. He'd learned to trust these subtle cues more than any map. He watched the direction of the wind, triangulating the source. It was coming from the far end of the town, near what looked like the old assay office. He waited for the sun to clear the eastern ridge, painting the street in long, stark shadows, before moving. He moved like a ghost himself, boots silent on the dusty ground, rifle held ready. The town seemed to hold its breath. As he drew closer to the assay office, he noticed something else. A small, carefully tended garden patch, struggling but alive, watered from a wooden barrel, fed by a makeshift gutter system. This wasn't the work of outlaws passing through. This was settlement. He crept to the side of the assay office, pressing himself against the rough timber wall. He heard voices now, low and hushed, women's voices. 3 of them. They were talking about rations, about the dwindling supply of flour, and the need to mend a leaky roof before the next storm. Caleb frowned. 3 women in a ghost town, alone. This complicated things. Thorne was a brute, but he wasn't known for taking women hostage, not unless they were leverage. He peered through a crack in the wall. 3 figures were gathered around a small, smoking fire pit inside the assay office, stirring a pot. Their clothes were plain, patched, and worn, their faces etched with the hard lines of survival. One was younger, perhaps in her late 20s, her dark hair braided tightly. Another was older, with a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. The third was somewhere in between, her face a canvas of quiet resilience. He watched, unnoticed, for a long time, trying to piece together their story. He knew he couldn't stay hidden forever, not if he wanted water or information. He weighed his options. Retreat, try to skirt the town and continue his pursuit of Thorne, or confront the women. The former felt like leaving a loose end, and the latter carried its own risks. He decided on a direct, but cautious, approach. He stepped out from behind the building, rifle still held loosely, non-threateningly, but ready. "Morning, ladies," he called out, his voice a low rumble, careful not to startle them. All three women froze, their movements stiff, eyes locking onto him with a mixture of fear and defiance. The older woman, her gaze sharp as a hawk's, was the first to speak. "State your business, stranger. This here's private land." Her voice was raspy, laced with a steely resolve that belied her age. Caleb slowly lowered his rifle, resting the butt on the ground. "Name's Caleb. Just passing through. Chasing a lead, not looking for trouble. Saw your smoke." He kept his hands visible, an open gesture. The younger woman clutched a heavy iron skillet, holding it like a weapon. The middle one, quieter, studied him with an unnerving intensity. "No one passes through Veridia anymore," the older woman retorted, her eyes narrowed. "Not unless they're lost, or looking for something they shouldn't." Caleb understood. This wasn't just a ghost town to them. It was a refuge, a secret. "Thorne," he said, deciding on honesty. "Elias Thorne. You seen him? Or his men?" The name hung in the air, heavy and dark. The women exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Then the older woman, with a grin set to her jaw, said, "We know the name." The information didn't come easily. It was a slow, arduous negotiation, built on tiny concessions and observations. They offered him stale coffee and a piece of hardtack, watching him like hawks as he ate. He, in turn, offered to fix the leaky roof he'd overheard them discussing. A small gesture, but a tangible one. As he worked, patching the holes with scavenged timber and tarp he found in the stable, he learned their names. Maeve, the older, resolute one. Clara, the watchful, middle-aged woman. And Lily, the youngest, her eyes holding a lingering sadness. They were the widows of outlaws, men who had ridden with Thorne until a double cross left them dead, and the women stranded in Veridia, a forgotten stopover on Thorne's old supply routes. They had nowhere else to go, nowhere safe. They'd been living there for months, surviving on wits and what little they could forage or trade in secret from a lone prospector who occasionally passed through. They hated Thorne, but they feared him more. He had a brutal streak, and they knew what he was capable of. Lily, in a quiet moment, confessed, "He stole everything. Our men, our future, even our names." Caleb understood then. This wasn't just about a bounty. It was about justice, a different kind of justice than the law usually handed out. "He's heading for Blackwood Pass," Maeve finally admitted, her voice low. "Plans to meet a buyer there for something he stole from the last town he hit. A strong box full of gold and papers. 3 days. He'll be there in 3 days." A ticking clock, just as he'd expected. The pass to Blackwood was treacherous, a narrow, winding trail through jagged peaks, prone to rock slides and sudden storms. 3 days was a tight window, even for Caleb in dust. He had to be smart, couldn't just ride in blind. Maeve, seeing his resolve, offered something more. "There's an old shortcut through the Serpent's Coil. Dangerous, barely a trail, but it'll shave a day off your ride. Only a few know it." She drew a rough map in the dust with a stick, pointing out landmarks, warning him of a particularly unstable scree slope and a hidden spring. Clara, meanwhile, meticulously counted out what little ammunition they had for an old, rusty pistol. "Take it," she insisted. "You might need it. We've managed so far without." Lily, her expression softer now, approached him with a small, worn leather pouch. "My husband's. He always carried it. Said it brought him luck." Inside, Caleb found a handful of dried jerky and a tarnished silver coin. He accepted them, understanding the weight of their offerings. This wasn't just a transaction. It was an alliance forged in desperation and shared animosity. He promised them, if he brought Thorne down, he would make sure the authorities knew about their situation, about the injustice, and that they wouldn't be left to rot in this forgotten town. He mounted Dust, the sun now high, casting long, stark shadows. He looked back at the three women, standing together in the doorway of the assay office, watching him. "Stay safe," he told them. Maeve just nodded, her gaze firm. "You too, Pathfinder." The name, a quiet acknowledgment of his role, resonated in the stillness. The serpent's coil lived up to its name. The trail twisted and turned, clinging to the side of a sheer cliff face. The ground beneath his horse's hooves, a loose shifting scree that threatened to give way with every step. Dust, sensing the peril, moved with an almost preternatural caution. Caleb dismounted in the worst sections, leading the horse, testing each foothold before trusting his weight to it. The air grew thin, cold, and the wind howled through the narrow defiles, a constant, mournful wail. He thought of Maeve's warning about the scree slope. He reached it just after midday, a vast expanse of loose rock that dropped several hundred feet into a rocky canyon. One wrong step, and it was over. He tied a rope around Dust's chest, securing the other end to a sturdy outcropping of rock, then began to cross himself, rifle slung across his back. Halfway across, a sudden tremor ran through the ground. A rock slide. Not a major one, but enough to send a cascade of stones clattering down the slope, narrowly missing Dust. The horse whinnied, rearing in panic against the rope. Caleb scrambled back, digging his boots into the loose earth, fighting for purchase. He managed to calm Dust, talking to him in low, steady tones, and together they slowly, painstakingly, made it across. He paused at the other side, heart pounding, sweat stinging his eyes. This was the kind of terrain that killed more men than any bullet. He checked his gear, counted his remaining rounds, and took a long, deep drink from his canteen. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the western sky in fiery streaks. He had lost time, precious hours. He pushed on, the memory of Thorne's cruel eyes fueling his resolve. He couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not after the promise he'd made. He reached the hidden spring Maeve had described just as darkness fell. It was a small, almost invisible trickle of water emerging from a rock face, pooling into a shallow basin. He let Dust drink deeply, then refilled his own canteen, the water blessedly cold and clear. He made a cold camp, unwilling to risk a fire. The air was sharp, biting, and he pulled his duster tighter, huddling against a meager rock overhang. He ate more hardtack and a piece of Lily's jerky, the simple sustenance a luxury after the day's exertion. He studied Maeve's map again by the dim light of the moon, tracing the route to Blackwood Pass. It was a choke point, a perfect place for an ambush. Thorne would expect pursuit, but not from this direction, not through the serpent's coil. Caleb decided on a bold move. Instead of approaching the pass directly, he would try to skirt it, climbing higher, finding an overlooked vantage point. It would be a brutal climb, but it would give him the element of surprise and a clear shot. He closed his eyes, visualizing the terrain, the angles, the likely positions Thorne's men would take. He was good at this, reading the land, predicting movement. It was a skill honed by years of living on the edge, a skill that had kept him alive when others had fallen. He allowed himself only a few hours of sleep, waking before dawn, stiff and cold, but ready. He began the ascent to the overlook before the sun had fully risen, navigating by the faint starlight and the pale pre-dawn glow. The climb was brutal, a scramble over loose rock and thorny scrub. He left Dust tethered in a sheltered crevice below, knowing the horse wouldn't be able to make the climb. He carried only his rifle, a few rounds, his canteen, and the binoculars he kept tucked in his duster. Each handhold was tested, each step deliberate. His muscles screamed in protest, but he pushed through the pain, fueled by the urgency of his mission. As the sun finally crested the horizon, painting the world in hues of gold and crimson, he reached the summit. The view was breathtaking, but Caleb barely registered the beauty. His eyes were fixed on Blackwood Pass below, and there they were, Thorne's men. 5 of them, gathered around a small campfire in a sheltered hollow near the pass entrance. Thorne himself, unmistakable with his broad shoulders and cruel swagger, was standing apart, looking through a spyglass towards the trail leading into the pass. They were waiting, just as Caleb had predicted. He scanned the area, noting their positions, their weapons, the strongbox secured to a pack mule. They were confident, almost complacent. This was his chance. He spent the next hour meticulously planning his approach. He couldn't take on 5 armed men head-on. He needed to use the terrain, create a diversion, isolate Thorne. He noticed a large, unstable rock formation on the ridge above Thorne's camp, precariously balanced. An idea began to form. He would trigger a small rock slide, not enough to kill them, but enough to create chaos, to scatter them, to draw their attention away from his true objective. He would then use the confusion to get to Thorne, take him down, and secure the strongbox. He moved with the precision of a predator, making his way to the rock formation, carefully dislodging smaller stones, creating a path for the larger ones to fall. He positioned himself for a clear shot at Thorne, then took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. He nudged the largest rock with the sole of his boot. It groaned, shifted, then began to roll, slowly at first, then picking up speed, gathering smaller rocks in its wake, a cascading roar echoing through the pass. Below, Thorne's men scattered, yelling, drawing their weapons, looking up in panic. Caleb seized the moment. He raised his rifle, took aim, and fired. The shot cracked through the air, finding its mark. Not Thorne, not yet. Caleb deliberately aimed for the pack mule, hitting its flank. The animal bucked, brayed, and pulled away from its tether, galloping wildly through the camp, scattering gear and men alike. The strongbox, loosely secured, bounced off the mule's back, tumbling to the ground with a dull thud. Chaos erupted. Thorne roared in frustration, drawing his own pistol. His men were disorganized, their attention split between the runaway mule, the rock slide, and the unexpected gunfire. Caleb used the confusion, scrambling down the slope, taking cover behind a cluster of boulders. He picked off 2 of Thorne's men quickly, using the element of surprise and his superior vantage point. The remaining 3 scattered, seeking cover, returning fire blindly. Caleb moved fast, a blur of motion, using every bit of the terrain to his advantage. He flanked one man, disarming him with a quick, brutal strike, then knocked him unconscious. That left Thorne and 1 other. Thorne, seeing his numbers dwindle, cursed loudly. "You bastard! You won't get away with this." He fired wildly in Caleb's direction, the bullets ricocheting off the rocks around him. Caleb knew he was running out of time. The remaining outlaw was trying to circle around him, creating a pincer movement with Thorne. Caleb feigned a retreat, drawing the outlaw into a narrow gully, then sprang out, taking him down with a swift, economical movement. Now it was just Thorne. The warlord was cornered, but he was dangerous. He had dropped his rifle and drawn a hunting knife, his eyes wild with rage. "Come on, Pathfinder." Thorne snarled. "Let's see what you're made of." Caleb met him head-on. The fight was brutal, primal. Thorne was bigger, stronger, fueled by a lifetime of violence. Caleb was faster, more precise, his movements economical, honed by necessity. They traded blows, dust rising around them, their grunts and the clang of metal against metal echoing in the pass. Thorne tried to slash with his knife, but Caleb parried, using his rifle as a shield, then bringing the butt of it down hard on Thorne's arm, forcing him to drop the blade. Thorne roared, tackling Caleb, sending them both tumbling to the ground. They grappled, rolling in the dust, fists flying. Caleb got the upper hand, pinning Thorne beneath him, his knee on Thorne's chest. He pulled his own pistol, pressing the barrel against Thorne's temple. "It's over, Thorne," he said, his voice cold, devoid of emotion. "The widows of Veridia send their regards." Thorne spat a curse, but the fight had gone out of him. The defeat was evident in his eyes. Caleb secured him with his own belt and some rope he salvaged from the scattered gear. He then tended to the strongbox, finding it intact. He checked the fallen outlaws, confirming they were either dead or unconscious. No immediate threat. The silence that followed the fight was profound, broken only by the whimpering of the pack mule. Caleb patched up the mule's superficial wound, gathered the scattered supplies, and then retrieved dust. He loaded Thorne onto the mule, his hands and feet tightly bound. The sun was setting again, casting long purple shadows across the pass. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dust and spent gunpowder. He looked out over the vast, unforgiving landscape. He had accomplished his mission, but the victory felt hollow, a grim satisfaction. He thought of Maeve, Clara, and Lily, their faces etched with resilience. He would honor his promise. He would make sure they were safe, that they could finally rebuild their lives, free from the shadow of Elias Thorne. He started the long journey back, leading the mule with Thorne, the strongbox secured. The trail was still treacherous, but now it felt different. He was no longer just a bounty hunter. He was a deliverer of justice, a pathfinder for those who had been lost. The ride back to Veridia was long and arduous, but Caleb felt a different kind of purpose now. The strongbox, heavy with gold and papers, was secured on dust, a testament to his success. Thorne, sullen and defeated, was tied to the pack mule. Caleb rode into the ghost town just as the moon was high, casting an ethereal glow over the skeletal buildings. Maeve, Clara, and Lily emerged from the assay office at the sound of hooves, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Their eyes fell on Thorne, then on Caleb, and a collective sigh of relief, almost a sob, escaped Lily's lips. "You did it," Maeve said, her voice barely a whisper, a rare tremor in her usually unshakable demeanor. Caleb nodded, dismounting. He won't trouble anyone again. He showed them the strongbox. This was what he stole. Gold and papers, deeds, titles. Looks like some of it might be yours, or your men's. The women gathered around the strongbox, their hands trembling as they touched the metal. Clara pulled out a sheaf of documents, her eyes widening. These are the papers for our men's claims." Thorne tried to take them. The truth was finally revealed, the depth of Thorne's treachery laid bare. Caleb knew then that their journey for justice was far from over, but this was a significant step. He spent the next few days in Veridia, not as a transient, but as a temporary protector. He helped them sort through the papers in the strongbox, identifying what belonged to whom. Some of the gold was indeed hers, stolen from their husbands before they were murdered. It wasn't enough to make them rich, but it was enough to start over, to buy supplies, to leave this desolate place. Caleb helped them repair more of the assay office, making it more secure. He hunted for them, bringing back fresh game. He even helped them dig a small, new well, finding a deeper water source with his keen eye for terrain. During these days, the women slowly shed their shell of suspicion and fear. They shared stories of their lives before Thorne, of their dreams, of the men they had loved. Lily, in particular, began to smile more, a genuine, unburdened smile. He saw the resilience, the quiet strength that had kept them alive in this forgotten place. He realized he had become something more than just a means to an end for them. He had become an ally, a friend. When it was time to leave, the farewell was understated, in true frontier style. No grand speeches, no tearful goodbyes. Maeve handed him a newly sewn pouch of dried meat and a small, carefully polished silver locket. "For luck, Pathfinder," she said, her gaze steady. "And for what you did, we won't forget." Clara pressed a worn map into his hand. "An old prospector's map. Shows a few hidden springs, some good hunting grounds. Might serve you well." Lily simply hugged him, a silent, heartfelt gesture that spoke volumes. Caleb mounted Dust, Thorne secured on the mule, ready for the long ride to the nearest marshal's office. He looked back at the three women, standing in the doorway of the assay office, now looking less like ghosts and more like pioneers, ready to reclaim their lives. He had ridden into a ghost town, expecting only a lead. He had found something far more profound, a purpose beyond the bounty, a connection to the quiet strength of those who survived against all odds. He turned Dust's head east, towards the rising sun. The land was still the same, vast and unforgiving, but Caleb, the Pathfinder, was not. He rode on, a changed man, towards a new horizon.